All right, man, welcome back to the God Center Men's Recovery Show. I am your host, Tim Holloway, and I am glad to be back at you again. Hey, look, if you're new here, this is a show dedicated to Christian men inside of recovery who want to live an awesome spirit-filled life. So if that's you, welcome. So we are in the 5th episode of talking about weathering the storms, and they're actually going to be chapters, and I'm creating a book. And I'm going to go through and edit and do different stuff, but you're getting the raw version of this book. I'm not sure the name yet, but so 5th episode, we're going to do a recap here. Number 1 is God is the kind of God that takes us through. And that is, He doesn't snatch us out. He doesn't take us out of these difficult situations. He's not this codependent parent that tries to rescue their child from all adversity and keeps them from going through pain. That is not a character description of God in any way or fashion. So God is the God that causes us to go through. And so we look at these different situations in life and we say, you know what? God is with me and I am going through these things and I'm going to get to the other side. Number 2 is that we must go through many tribulations. Jesus said, in this world you will have tribulations. Another writer said that many are the afflictions of the righteous. And Jesus said that you will be persecuted. And so it's important to understand that storms are inevitable. Storms will come. And honestly, we should thoroughly expect for them to happen. And we shouldn't be caught off guard like some strange thing is happening to us. Most of the damage comes to us because of our expectations and our opinion about the storm. And that is that we expect a life free from storms or we're in the storm and we have all these opinions related to it. And so it's important to bust through and we'll definitely be talking about that in the future. Number 3, recap is that we are to walk through the valley of the shadow of death. And that is that we're not to build our house there. We're not to think that this is the way life is. And we're not supposed to take root there and say, you know what, I'm going to stay right here in this terrible circumstance, this terrible situation. I'm just going to stay here in the storm and I'm going to get used to these conditions. That's not what God has called us to do. He's called us to walk through those things and to get to the other side and to have an awesome testimony, an awesome lesson on the other side of the pain. And lastly, during this walking through this valley of the shadow of death, it's important to fear no evil. Now, the greatest sin, I've talked about this already. I'm just going to touch just a small recap. The greatest sin is not adultery, fornication, all these different things. The greatest sin is fear. And that is fear is the root decision. It comes in the form of insecurity. It comes in the form of inadequacies, and the greatest sin starts with fear. And once we get fear rolling, all of these other behaviors manifest out of that fear. So inside of the storm, it's important inside of the valley to say, you know what, I will fear no evil. And that is, just because I feel the emotion of being afraid doesn't mean that I'm going to respond to it and walk in fear. Now, I'm not saying that you should say, you know what, I should experience a fear-free life, and that's where I'm not scared of anything. When the reality, that is not true. Fear comes with its presence, with its temptation, and we have a choice whether we're going to respond to fear, or whether we're going to let fear push us down, or we're going to recognize that fear is present, and we're going to begin to operate in faith anyways. And that often means that you're going to do it scared. I don't know how many things in my life that I had to do scared. And that is, I've faced a situation that I've never faced before, so I don't have any frame of reference for this situation. And it causes a lot of fear and uncertainty because I don't have a roadmap for this situation. So I've faced multiple different situations in my life that have caused me to be scared in some way or fashion. And the reality that I have found is that we can override the fear feelings and we can begin to do what's best for us even in the presence of fear. And that is most likely that we could do it scared. And it's okay to do things scared. And it's more important to walk in that fashion than to allow fear to cripple you and to inhibit you from doing the things that are amazing inside of this life. Know this. that anything great, there's going to be a temptation for you to fear. And that is to walk away, to give up, and to not go through with this awesome thing, right? And so that resistance is there to get you to quit, to get you to stop and to not step up. And the reality is that once we begin to go down this route of fear and quitting, it develops a track record inside of our brain. And that is that in this last situation, we backed out and we ran away and we tucked our tail and we got scared and we allowed fear to govern and control us. Now, what begins to happen is when we begin to make decisions based upon that fear, we develop a mental track record that we are a quitter and that we run and that we are scared and that we are the kind of person that allows fear to dominate and dictate their life. And what that communicates to our brain is something very detrimental, because all of a sudden we become somebody we don't really respect. It's hard to admire a fearful person who runs in scarcity, right? And so that's what happens inside of our brain, and we begin to feel this shame, and we begin to despise ourselves and not like what we have become because of our current track record of running in fear. So it's important to begin to develop a track record of faith and positivity, is that, you know what, I feel these feelings of fear, but I'm going to step up, conquer, and overcome these things. And all of a sudden we begin to develop a different track record in our brain, something and someone that we respect, and therefore you get more of the behavior in return. And the reality is no kind of positive thinking is going to get you out of this. That is, if you constantly succumb to fear and make a decision based upon fear, that you could say all the positive words that you want, right? Of how great you are and how lovely you are and this, that, and the other thing, but your brain knows that you're lying, okay? Because your brain is giving you different information that look at all these areas where you are deciding to be governed by fear, and this positive mindset that you claim to believe is very superficial and it really doesn't affect you in a very deep manner. So it's important that we begin to rise in faith and develop a track record of faith and become someone that we like and respect. This is the real, true way to positivity. So Luke 8:22 says this, "Now it happened on a certain day that he got into a boat with his disciples, and he said to them, 'Let us cross over to the other side of the lake,' and they launched out." And so what I want to talk about here is this getting inside of the boat, going to the other side, and really closing the chapter on understanding that we have to go through. We have to have the ability to go through certain things to get to the other side. And so I remember one of my first boat experiences. My friend and I went on a boat. It was a little rickety houseboat. It was pulled into, I guess that's where the guy lived. And a friend of mine said, "How about we go deep sea fishing?" And so I'm like, okay, that'll be a great idea, you know. And so we go to this little rickety houseboat on the harbor there. And we get into the boat and we, putter out there. I mean, it's really, really rickety, small houseboat, and it moved very slowly. But it seemed like for hours we were out and going into the deep sea. So as we were out there, the boat began to take on water, and I began to get fearful. Here I am, my first time on a boat, and the boat is sinking. Okay. And so it started to take on water, more and more and more water. And so the captain looks like he's starting to panic a little bit too. So he calls the Coast Guard and for us to come and be rescued. Okay. So we're sitting there for a cool minute waiting for the lifeguards, or it was Baywatch is what actually pulled up, but the Coast Guards to come rescue us. And as we're waiting, we are getting suited up, and that is we're getting our life jackets on because we don't really know how this event or this circumstance is going to play out. And so, I'm thinking in my mind, like, when are we going to jump out of this boat? Because, we're getting pretty close to the point of jumping out. And so I begin to, try to remember, which direction I should be going once we get out of this boat. But at any rate, the Baywatch showed up. They showed up with a pump, and they threw the pump inside of the boat, and they attached us to them, and they began to pull us into shore, and while they were pumping water out of the boat. And so we got rescued that day. But I say all that to say this, is that there are certain circumstances. I didn't wake up that morning and say, you know what, I'm going to be in the middle of the ocean and the boat is going to start to sink. Like, that wasn't even on my agenda, right? And so the reality is that these things come upon us in a very sudden manner, and they are unplanned, they are unforeseen, and we just couldn't see them really taking place. Now, during these moments, it's panic tries to set in. And that's the reality of what these disciples faced that day. They got in the boat with Jesus and they entered a storm, and panic set in. And so we have a choice, during this situation. Now, we know that fear is a normal tendency, and that is, it was probably very helpful for us in the past. As we evolved as men, we had to be scared of bears, lions, oh my, right? And we had to really have that triggered flight, or freeze response to begin to, for our own personal safety. But the reality is, a lot of times it is used to our own detriment. And that is that, our life is not in danger in any way or fashion. And our safety and security is not really, a physical security is not in danger. But yet these fight, flight, or freeze responses come up. And it's very important during that time that we make good decisions. Because the reality is that we know from studying the body and the mind and stuff, that during this situation, the blood flow leaves the brain. Your heart begins to pump, right? And the blood flow leaves the brain, and its oxygenation goes throughout your whole body for you begin to move, so you can begin to fight, so you can begin to do all of these other things. And the reality is that during this time, your cognitive skills are not very high. And that is because the nutrition and the blood leaves the brain. It's not at its best thinking capacity. And so that would cause us to really understand that whenever there is fear, whenever there is a storm in a situation that fear tries to set in, during that time, our cognitive skills are not at its best decision-making abilities. And in that situation, we probably shouldn't make too many decisions until we get back to the realm of peace and the realm of faith. And that is that it takes us stepping out of the situation. It takes us removing ourselves and getting in a state of peace so we can begin to commune with God in our heart and begin to make decisions that are actually going to benefit us. Now, the reality is that inside this state of fear is terrible decision-making skills. Now, anybody who would want to influence your behavior in a negative fashion to get you to do something uses fear to accomplish that, right? Remember this, when you're young and you're insecure and you're inside a dating relationship, maybe you're in your teens, and all of a sudden fear begins to dominate the relationship, and someone introduces fear to try to manipulate you, or maybe that they're going to break up with you to get you to act and behave in a certain manner. And so we understand that all forms of manipulation come from fear. And if the government or somebody wanted to influence your behavior, or marketing or advertising, they try to influence your behavior, what do? They begin to identify with your fear and to identify with your pain. And that is that you are in this situation, and they understand, and they have the solution to your problem. So all advertisers, what do? They magnify the problem, and they get you to have fear. The fear of what? Fear of missing out. the fear of not experiencing this amazing reality, the fear of social pressure and not measuring up to social standards, and all of these different things. So, every influence that wants to influence us in a negative fashion comes through the spirit of fear. And so it's important to understand when this influence is taking place and to begin to ask ourselves, am I being influenced by fear? And is this fear trying to motivate me in a direction that I don't want to go? And if that's the case, then we stop, pause, reflect, we get ourselves out of the situation, and we begin to get in tune and align with the Spirit of God inside of our lives. And we begin to make decisions that are based upon faith. That's an awesome reality. I had another boat experience. Once again, deep sea fishing. They're all tied to, the only time I want to jump in the middle of the ocean is a deep sea fishing experience. And so I've been on multiple deep sea fishing, but this one was an overnighter. And this was towards Mexico. And it was during like El Nino season or something. And it was the most miserable boat ride I can ever think of. When I look at these disciples and the storm was tossed to and fro, and I mean the boat was just up and down, up and down. And I'm a firm believer in Dramamine, so I'm Dramamine up, probably a little couple extra, right? And so my legs are just rubber, and I'm just like, whoo, I'm just going with the flow. But people around me cannot make it to the bathroom fast enough. People are throwing up everywhere. And, when it's time to go to sleep, I'm just like, woo, I'm just going with it, man. The Dramamine just got me in the zone, and I'm not fighting, I'm not resisting. And I do just fine, but I see everybody in there trying to go to sleep while we're just going up and down and just literally in a state of misery. So many men were in a state of misery. And so understanding that the storm, that's the intentions of the storm. And that is to get you in a state of agitation, frustration, and defeat. And to get you within a state of misery so you begin to compromise. And what begins to happen then is that more misery comes. And you begin to dig yourself deeper inside of this misery. So once we begin to understand the purpose of the storms and what they are set out to accomplish, we can begin to shift our mindset and say, you know what, the storm's not going to beat me. I'm going to learn the lesson from this storm. I'm going to walk out of this storm, and I'm going to triumph victoriously over this thing. So we have different experiences that we have to go through. In the last episode, we talked about some. We're going to continue on in the different things that the Bible says we must go through. It's like a given. We should set our expectations level accordingly. And you may be like, Tim, man, that sounds like very negative thinking. That's like, I just want to be positive. And I get that. And what I understand from that is, when Jesus said to Peter how he was going to die and then he was going to have to die for his faith, I am not saying that Peter still couldn't have a sense of joy in these situations of life, okay? I'm not saying that he couldn't maintain an inner peace during all these situations. But what I'm saying, if Peter was expecting to be exalted to some throne and become established as some church leader, and he was going to live on in prosperity and peace, then Peter would have had these false expectations, right? And then all of a sudden, if he finds himself in jail and about to face death, there is going to become very strong moments of losing faith. And the losing faith comes from false expectations. Okay? And we put these upon God all the time. And these false expectations are actually what destroy our faith. When we begin to believe God for something that we really don't have any right to believe Him for, right? One of these things recently was the presidency, right? There was millions upon millions of people that were believing God to accomplish this great miracle and cause something to happen, and had all these expectations and all these prayers and all these prophecies and all of these different things, right? And of course, as we know, the expectations were not met, the prophecies failed, and all of these different things did not come to pass. Now, that's not to say that it won't come pass in some future date, but the reality is that we put expectations upon God that He's supposed to come through for us in this, that, and the other way. And what we don't understand is that we do not have the right to put God inside of that box, and we don't have the right to expect that He's going to behave in a certain manner, okay? He's God, and He knows all things, past, present, and future, okay? And what He does is what He does. And now it's important to set our expectation level accordingly. So Isaiah 43:2 says this. When, say with me, when. You following along in this? When you pass through the waters, I will be with you. Well, what I want to point out here, it's not if. It's not a if you're going to pass through the waters, but it's when. And there's going to be multiple different situations that happen inside of our lives when we are going to pass through the waters. But He says this, I will be with you. And through the rivers, they will not overflow you. And listen to this, and when you walk through the fire, you will not be burned, neither shall the flame kindle upon you. So in every one of these, it gives us the analogy of going through. And remember, I talked to you about going through is from point A to point B and going through the channel to get to the other side. Okay, that's why they call waters channels. And so it gets you through to the other side. And through the waters, through the rivers, and through the fire. And each one, He said, when. Now, there's a promise attached to each one, and that is when you walk through the waters, I will be with you. Now, remember this, that it is the disciples that got into the boat with Jesus. Now, that's an important reality to remember inside of this situation. And the reality is that we are not going through the storms alone. Okay, we're not secluded. We're not in some way withdrawn in that we are without help or without comfort or without strength. The reality is that there's somebody who is going through this situation with us. Now, we look at the people of Israel when they were going through the wilderness. What did they have? Okay, they had the Spirit of God, the glory of God. They had Moses, the leadership of God. They had all of these different things, right? And God was there present with them in the wilderness. Now, God is not like this. That, okay, it's time for you to go to the storm, but I'm not going with you. Now, it's time for you to go to the wilderness and experience these terrible circumstances, but I'm not going with you. Now, the reality is that God goes with us inside of our pain. And I find this to be very, very comforting experience in knowing and understanding that we are not alone. That God is present there. So much so, He gave us a story about 3 Hebrew children, and they refused to bow, and they were thrown into this fiery furnace, right? And they were in the furnace, they were in the affliction, they were in the pain. And inside of that situation, there was a 4th person walking around, and it looked like the Son of God, okay? And so it's important to understand that even though we're in these painful situations, God is there present with us. In fact, so much so that He dwells and He lives inside of our heart. We often think that we need to go outside of somewhere and find God, like He's lost or something. Or that He has some special house that we can go to and like He lives there or something. And what we fail to understand is that the Creator of the universe has decided to take up residency inside of our hearts. And that means He goes where I go. If I'm in pain, He's there with me. If I'm in difficult circumstances that are trying my faith, He's there with me. And so it's important to understand that reality. You are not alone inside of this. So through the waters. Now, this word is a really, really funny interpretation. I looked it up and I did a double take because it literally means urine. Okay, it has the analogy and that it's often used to describe urine. And so I look at that and I understand that there are certain times in our life where we could be deep in urine, and that's just the reality of what this is trying to communicate. When you are in deep in urine, or this flood of something has come upon you and you're in the deep, God promises that He is going to be with you. Now, during those circumstances that I talked about being in a boat, I was in the deep, right? I was away from the shore. I was away from the land. I was in deep waters. I had deep trouble. And the reality is that we get inside of those different situations and we step out. We step out in faith and we leave the comfort zone. Now, the comfort zone is dry land, right? The moment that the disciples stepped inside of that boat, they left predictability, they left the comfort zone, and what they really left was a sense of control, if you will. And so they stepped out. And the Bible says that they launched out. And usually when you launch something, you push out, but it symbolizes everything about going into the deep waters. And that is, inside of our frame, our family, faith, fitness, and finances, that we endeavor to go inside the deep waters. And that is, we're going to leave the shore of complacency, of mediocrity, and we're going to step out and we're going to go into the deep. And that's where deep conversations begin to happen, deep connection, deep communication, deep intimacy. All of these deep things begin to happen inside a relationship when we step out and we leave the shore. Now, the same thing that begins to happen in our relationship with God. If we want to go deep inside of our faith, that means that we are going to really be stripped of everything that we think we know. And it's really a process of tearing apart so you can be built back up. And that is really an uncomfortable experience. It's not very fun to be stripped and to be pruned in such manner. But the reality is that if we want to go deep, we're going to have to leave the surface level stuff. And we're going to have to go deep. Going deep represents an all-in commitment. Like if you're tipping your toe in the water, there's no commitment there, right? If you got 1 foot in the boat and 1 foot on dry land, there's not much commitment there. You haven't really surrendered to the process. You haven't really gone all in. And so this idea of them jumping inside of the boat and launching out is the reality of going all in. We're all in the boat now. We are all committed to the process and the destination and going to the other side. And so it is, I find that inside of our frame, whether it's family, faith, fitness, or finances, that all in, launching out, getting in the boat is a requirement, is a must, if we are going to achieve anything great inside of those areas of our life. So through the floods, the promise is, I will be with you. I'll be with you when it feels like you're covered in urine, right? When you go through these crappy situations, I am present there. Through the rivers. Now, this is an analogy of a heavy stream. This is a symbolization of current. I remember when I was a young boy, we lived in Southern California, and we went to Newport Beach a couple times throughout the year. And one of these times, the current was so strong that I got pulled out. And it pulled me all the way down to the pier. And I was so scared for my life. I thought for sure that I was going to die. I didn't have any fight left in me, and I was just being taken away, inside of the current. So I came up to the pier, and on the pier there's these shales. And I remember this vividly, that I'm holding on to the rocks of the pier, and they have these shells. And they feel like piercing, like they're super sharp. And so I do everything that I can to pull myself up onto these shells that are attached to the rocks. And when I get up and I rest for a little bit and I begin to stand up, I see that there's just blood everywhere. So apparently, as I'm pulling myself up, I cut myself in multiple different locations on my knees and all these different things. And I think I was about 7 years old at the time. And I just remember thinking, once again, I'm dying. Like, I'm going to die. And then the lifeguard came running down the pier, and he helped me get up from those rocks, and he walked me to my mother. And I just remember that situation as being very frightful, very scared situation. But it is the reality of the power of the current. Now, I look back at that situation, and, if a couple of things happened just slightly different, I, of course, would have been dead. If I gave up hope before I got pushed to the pier, I would have been dead. Maybe if the lifeguard didn't see me, all of these different things. But the reality is that we go through situations, and we go through heavy current. And that heavy current is a sway. It is an influence. And the influence is meant to pull you away. And of course, pull you away to make you a victim. And so we got to understand that this is taking place inside of our lives, that we are going to face situations, we're going to face currents, and those currents are to pull us away and influence us in a different direction. Now, here's God's promise inside of this current influence, that it will not overflow you. Now, it may feel like you're being overtaken by the worldly influence and the ways of the world and all of these different things. But we have the same promise that God is there, present with us, and these things will not overflow us. And what that means is that we are not going to drown. We are not going to be taken away. And we got to stand on that. And lastly, is through the fire. Man, through the fire, and not being burned. And this fire is a situational thing that comes upon all men. And all men are faced with some sort of fire. Different situations that come to refine them. And we have this promise that we can come through those situations and really not even smell like smoke. We can come through the difficulty and the fiery trials, and we can come through it. We can maintain our joy, we can maintain our composure, and we can get to the other side, and we have this promise that we will not be burned, neither shall the flame kindle upon you. Man, I just find that an awesome reality that, these flames, these pain, they're actually a blessing in disguise. And they give us the understanding of the identity of an overcomer. That I am in this flame, and this flame is not consuming me. I'm in this trial and this temptation or this situation inside of my frame, family, faith, fitness, and finances. And this thing, this fire, is not going to destroy me. I am a fire walker. And I walk inside of the fire. And I am not burned, and I am not kindled. I don't allow the flames to change my perspective. I don't allow the flames to change my attitude, right? Now, a lot of people, when they get thrown into these things, we have a choice. And that is, are we going to allow our circumstances to determine our reaction? Are we going to make opinions and judgments about all these different situations that are taking place and allow those opinions to begin to destroy us, to get us bitter, to get us in self-pity, and to get us in victimhood? Or are we going to walk through it? So Jeremiah 2:6 says this. Neither said they, where is the Lord that brought us up out of the land of Egypt? And he led us through the wilderness, the land of deserts, pits, the land of drought, and the shadow of death, through the land where no man passes through, where no man lives. And so this verse here really breaks down all the different things that God desires to take us through. So we talked about the water, we talked about the floods, we talked about the fire, and here is the wilderness, desert, pits, droughts, shadow of death. Now I'm going to touch briefly on these just so we get a reality of these, but some of these I've already talked about, so I'm not going to go into too much detail. But through the wilderness, we know what that is. That is the time of testing and trial. And we're going to go through these things to get to the other side. The promised land is the other side of the wilderness. Jesus was led by the Spirit to the wilderness to be tempted of the devil. And after he came back, he returned in the power of the Spirit. So we understand this. Wilderness is preparation to where we want to go. Next one is the desert. And that is if you've ever been to the desert, I used to work in the desert, 120 degree weather, just terrible, terrible experiences trying to work inside of such extreme heat and humidity. We used to have to set up stations of water misters because of heat exhaustion and people passing out. And the reality about the desert condition is it's just exhausting. It's extremely exhausting. No matter how hard you try, you still end up with muscle cramps and all these different things, the beginning stages of heat exhaustion. So I say all that to say this, is that these desert experiences that we are called to go through are times where things are just exhausting, right? Like whatever it is, it's just like you're sick. I'm sick of dealing with this situation. I'm sick of dealing with this problem. I'm getting so tired of this, and you fill in the blank, right? Those are the situations what we have gone through and will continue to go through in some way or fashion. And it's important for us to understand that there are going to be times where we are just flat out tired and that we are exhausted. Now, it's important during that time to understand that that is a time where we're most vulnerable for any sort of lust, any sort of temptation, any sort of negative situation that can come into our life. So it's important to really protect ourselves during this time, take care of ourselves, begin some self-care, begin to get vacation, time alone, all of these different things during this time. Recognize that it's taking place so you don't end up making decisions and doing stuff that you really don't want to do. So, in the deserts, in the pits, this is a place of misery. This is a place of degradation, degrading. And we often come to these situations, and for some reason, we want to stay there. And we go into the pit. In fact, oftentimes we dig our own pit, right? We dig our own mess. And we get inside of our mess and we just keep on digging. But the reality is that there are certain choices that can lead us into this pit. And this pit, it could be some sort of financial ruin. It could be discouragement. It could be depression. It could be all of these different things. And we fall into the pit. That is, oftentimes it happens unbeknownst to us, and we make decisions or turn left when we should have turned right, and we find ourselves in this situation. What should we do? In this situation, we should recognize the reality that we are inside of it. Somewhere along the way, I made a wrong turn. And here I am inside of the pit, and this pit has led to extreme discouragement, frustration, disappointment, depression, whatever it is. And I recognize that this situation is happening, and I'm going to begin to climb out of this situation, and I'm going to go back and turn left or turn right where I turned left. And so it's really just traveling back to the decision, the point of crisis that led to the situation. And going back there and saying, am I going to learn this lesson? Am I going to find where I have gone off the path in this situation and found myself in a funk, found myself in this state and condition? Am I going to trace back my steps and begin to restore the path that I was on and begin to go forward? Now, this takes a lot of strength, takes a lot of growth, because oftentimes you have to admit that you're wrong. You made a wrong decision, you made a wrong action, you made something that has snowballed into this pit. And so making a different decision. So that is a place of misery. So we're going to go through the desert, exhausting situations. We're going to go through the pits, that is a state of misery and miserable situations that we find ourselves in. And droughts. This is a prolonged period of dryness. Have you ever felt this? I've felt this. I'm highly acquainted with influence, inspiration, revelation. I love to look into the Word, and I love for the words to jump out at me, and I love to experience the direction of God, and I love all those things, and they're wonderful. They feel wonderful. I feel very connected to about daily bread and gathering that daily bread. But the reality is sometimes we read that word and there ain't nothing. I mean, nothing jumps out at us. There's no inspiration. There's no revelation. And we go out throughout the day looking for something inspirational or looking for some word of God, and nothing comes. And oftentimes this period of dryness can be prolonged. And we don't understand that it's just a phase. It's just a process. This is not the way life is. We are going to get through this situation, and we are going to get to the other side, okay? And in fact, during that time, I would allow it to build up the thirst inside of you, that you begin to hunger for this inspiration and revelation, and let it build up expectation on the inside of you that will sustain you during these times. So droughts. A prolonged shortage or lack of something desired, okay? And that is really getting stuck inside this need behavior and having a psychological, emotional, mental need not met. That is really the definition of a drought. And we do go through times where it seems like those needs are not being met in some way or some fashion, and this causes disappointment and frustration. But when we know that this is all a part of life, we don't allow this discouragement to grab hold of us. We just recognize, I'm going through the wilderness. I'm going through a period of exhaustion. I'm going through a period of this pit, of this misery. I'm going through a period of dryness. But there is the promised land on the other side. There is strength and there is health if I hold on to the faith. And there is life and substance on the other side of this dryness. So it's all about going through these difficult moments and holding on. And lastly is the shadow of death. And the shadow of death is just calamity. Okay, it's actually translated the grave, to go by the grave, and that is it's a disastrous event, a calamity that has come upon you, and you have suffered a great loss, and it has caused you a massive amount of distress and suffering. Now, this shadow of death is definitely of losing security, that is losing your job or losing your home, losing a loved one, losing mental capacity or something of that nature, mental health. All of these things are extreme disastrous events that are called the shadow of death, that we are all called to walk through in some way or fashion. Now, what is more glorious? Allowing this shadow of death to destroy you and consume you, to get you bitter, or to say, you know what, I'm going to walk through these disastrous events that have taken place inside of my life, and I'm going to get to the other side. I'm going to get to the other side. So know this. Don't consider this fiery trial that has come upon you as some strange thing that has happened to you. In fact, it is going on throughout the Christian brothers throughout the whole world. And many men are experiencing this persecution that I'm talking about, and this life of darkness that seems to be overtaking them. But understand this, is that we are called to be pit walkers. And that is that we are called to walk through these pit moments. Walk through them. And we are called to be fire walkers. And that is that we go through the flame, we go through the trials, we go through the situations, and we come through on the other side. And this is our calling. This is who we are. And this is the faith that has been imparted inside of our life. It is a faith that goes through. It's not a faith that gives up. Okay? It's important to understand that, brothers. All right, I will see you tomorrow.